Greetings, I'm Senator Michael Baumgartner. Today was a great day for the state of Washington, families, and college students, because I was very pleased to announce the formation of a new plan to increase funding for higher education and reduce college tuition by over 3%. It's a great day for the state of Washington because we're going to be able to do this within existing tax revenues because we're making higher education a priority. You can learn more by watching my press conference today when we made our big announcement on our 10-3-50 higher education as a priority plan. Today we think is a great day for college students, for working families, and for higher education in the state of Washington. The bipartisan Majority Coalition Caucus today is announcing a bold new plan for higher education. We call it our 10-3-50 plan, which is going to invest in higher education. It's going to cut tuition for college students, and it's going to create a new performance model to fund STEM performance and other desired degrees and functions we'd like to see at institutions of higher learning. Since I've been here in Olympia, I've heard a lot of legislators pay lip service to higher ed. They've said that they've cared about higher ed. And yet, when push comes to shove, and when it becomes time to decide what are the priorities here in Olympia, higher education has lost. Government has grown, has expanded, and much of that growth and expansion has come off the backs of college students, as we've seen state support for higher education fall and tuition skyrocket. The Majority Coalition Caucus is coming together to say that needs to stop. We're going to make higher education a priority, and we're going to create a new path forward for our economy, for the social mobility of our residents here and our young people, and essentially restore a chance at the American dream here for people in the state of Washington. So it is indeed a special day. I'm going to talk through just briefly some of the high-level points and then turn to Senator Bailey, who's going to talk about some of the additional benefits of the plan, and Senator Erickson as well, and then we'll get a few comments from Tristan and some student perspective. So the 10, we're committing to a 10% increase in higher education funding. Higher ed will be funded at more than $3 billion in the coming biennium. We're also going to take higher education out of the back of the budget and put in statute an obligation of the state to fund higher ed moving forward. Previously, in today, higher education, one of the reasons it gets hammered is it's the back of the budget discussion. We want to put in statute an obligation to fund higher education. So that's the 10. The 3, we're reducing college tuition to 3% for the next 2 years. Students will see a 3% reduction in higher ed. The double-digit increases are going to stop. We believe there's enough funding that we're putting forward into the universities to cover their lost revenue and then some. So that's the 3%, and Barb will talk about some of the additional benefits of that. Moving forward, after 2016, we have a Student Tuition Protection Compact, which is if the state provides its obligatory level of funding in statute, after 2016, tuition increases are going to be limited to the rate of inflation. So again, we want to put more money in. We want to make sure that it's helping students because costs have gone too high. And then finally, the 50. So we want to see outcomes driven through performance. We want taxpayers to get better value for their tax dollars. So we're creating a competitive fund, higher education fund. It will be funded at the level of $50 million in this biennium. It builds on the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2011, the dashboard that was there, and we took out 5 metrics from there. Primarily, and those metrics are STEM degree production, average time to degree completion, percentage of low-income population, freshman retention rates, and a new metric will be efficiency and space utilization. We've had a lot of capital building construction at universities. We want to make sure that the taxpayers are getting good value for those buildings being used widely. Community and technical college are also benefiting from this as well, and their performance metrics will be driven by the student achievement metrics as decided by the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges. So we think this is a bold plan, a good plan, and that this is a great day for the state of Washington. And with that, I'll turn it to Senator Bailey that will talk about some of the other funding benefits that you get from investing in higher education and giving students a 3% cut in tuition.
Well, thank you, Senator Baumgartner. One of the things that we know right now is that the most students are coming out of higher ed in debt. As a matter of fact, the average debt right now is about $22,000. This is unacceptable. As a mother of 4 and a grandmother about to look at having our grandchildren educated in higher ed, it's unacceptable right now that we have the kinds of tuition costs that mean that not only were my children in debt, they are still in debt while they are now contemplating their children going to college. We have to stop this cycle. So the 3% reduction right now in tuition, I think, is a wonderful start at looking at how we're going to control tuition costs. Also, there are some protections around that, and the fact that if we see that tuition needs to go up at some point later, tuition will be possible to increase, but not more than the rate of inflation. So that's one of the control factors that we'll have on the tuition costs. In addition to that, by doing this, I think most of you know the GAP program is a program that I said early on when I first came to the Senate, we have to protect this program for the hardworking middle-income families of this state who are saving and trying to save for college tuition. The GAP program needs to be a viable program. And so with this enactment, especially around the tuition reductions, we will be able not only to make GAP whole, but also look at it from a future standpoint. Actuarial costs on that are going to turn around to the positive. And so that is one thing that I think is exceptional about our plan. We also plan to extend the state need grant up to about a 7% increase, which would serve more than an additional 4,000 students. Right now we know that the state need grant does not serve approximately about 30,000 to 32,000 students go underserved because there's not enough money, so we're going to put more money into state need grant. Then I'll let Senator Erickson talk a little more about 50.
Great. Thanks, Senator Bailey. Thanks for coming out today. I think the key thing to remember is that since 2007, the legislature has cut actual dollars going to higher ed by about 43% to our four-year institutions. And that's not a Olympia cut where you reduce the amount of increase. That's an actual real dollar reduction of state general fund commitment to our four-year institutions. Now, what has happened during that time is we've made it up through higher tuition rates for the students in Washington State. So today, I think what's exciting, not only are we stopping that downward trend in terms of the state's commitment to higher education, we're actually increasing our biannual commitment by 10%. And that's an amazing change of direction for the Washington State Legislature to stop the reduction in actual spending, say we're going to increase it 10%. And I know for students in Washington State, saying a 3% reduction in tuition instead of the 5 to 7% increase that's being talked about throughout Olympia right now is a huge change. It nets out to almost a 10% net reduction in what they're going to be paying in tuition. So it's a huge win. The other issue that's so important throughout Washington State is our commitment to science, technology, engineering, and math, commonly known as STEM. And so this commitment is the extra $50 million that goes into STEM projects throughout Washington State to make sure that we're producing the graduates that we need to see in Washington State. It can be at all of our universities. I know I'm a little bit particular to Western Washington University up in my hometown, but to be able to put money into engineering degrees up there to produce what the companies say they want. It's a great opportunity for us to step up and make that commitment. We can do it under our current budget by making priority decisions and how we move forward. And I think that's the key thing to remember is that finally here in Olympia, you have a group in the Washington State Legislature who's stepping up to be the champion of higher ed again. So I think it's an exciting day. I think the students have been waiting for this since about 2007 when the state started to divest itself from its higher ed expenditures. So it's a good movement forward, and I think it'll prepare our students to be leaders in the world once again as we produce those STEM graduates that industry is calling out for.
Tristan, you want to say a few things?
Yeah, definitely. We are very excited to see this proposal from Senator Baumgartner, and I'd first like to say that I'm very appreciative of the chance to mention a few words. My name is Tristan Hannon. I am the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Associated Students of Washington State University. We see this as an important step forward in the conversation about higher education. Legislators this session have finally come to a realization that disinvestment in higher education is unsustainable and is pricing students across the state out of a valued education. We believe that Senator Baumgartner's call for a tuition decrease is important and a recognition of the incredibly high cost of attending our public institutions. The 10% increase in higher education funding and $50 million to performance funding is vital to protecting the quality of our higher education institutions. So thank you very much to Senator Baumgartner, Senator Bailey, and Senator Erickson for having me here today.
Well, that will open up the questions.
How are we going to pay for it?
With a 10% increase in funding and a prioritization of higher
How do we
education,
pay for it out of the budget?
with an allocation of $3 billion in what we're going to spend and a prioritization towards higher education.
But I'm not sure where will that money come from?
Well, we have a 7% increase in revenue in the state currently projected. Of course, we have a new forecast coming out tomorrow. But as things stand, we have a 7% increase in revenue in the state, and we're saying we need to make higher education a priority with how we're going to spend that 7% increase in money.
So is there a place you're planning to cut, or a new tax revenue that you're planning to implement that would help cover?
No,
that?
we very much feel that we can prioritize higher education under existing revenue, and it doesn't require a tax increase. Again, we have a 7% increase in revenue as of today, and this is saying that higher education is going to grow by 10%.
So when you're doing that prioritization, what's getting kicked off again? What's getting cut?
Well, you'll see our total budget roll out and the allocation decisions we make in coming days.
So this hasn't been budgeted in the budget yet?
This is a commitment to spend $3 billion in our budget.
I mean, it seems a little disingenuous to talk about adding all this money when we don't know what's going to be cut or how it's going to be paid for, if there's new tax revenue or something like that.
Well, you will see the total budget in coming days, but this is saying that $3 billion of that's going to go to higher ed.
The state has made a commitment as to limit the growth in tuition and has not kept those promises. Why is this any different?
Well, this is different because it moves it into statute and says that we're going to take it out of the back of the budget and we're going to put in law, in statute, that there's an obligation to fund in-state students who show up at our higher institutions of higher education. So that is a big change in terms of how it's been done, because it would require undoing law, which of course can be done around here. You know, you get enough legislators together for any review, but it is an extra protection for higher education. And more importantly, it's a public commitment from a bipartisan coalition that we're going to prioritize.
If I recall correctly, the state has had statutes before limiting the rate of growth of tuition. So again, how is this any different?
Well, it's an obligation to provide funding per student at the door at the current baseline level of funding.
So this 3% decrease in tuition, how do you accomplish this? Do you order the universities to cut their tuition?
Yes. Yeah, we have tuition authority now, and we'll be cutting tuition 3%. If our proposal passes.
For all?
For all, yes, all institutions higher learning, 4 years, and CTCs. We'll see a 3% reduction. We'll hold that reduction, remain in place for 2 years. And then moving out of that, provided that we provide, the legislature steps up with its level of baseline funding that'll be put into statute, then tuition will be limited to what the inflation rate is. And we would see additional dollars coming in on top of that baseline level of funding through the performance fund. The other of the many big ideas here is that we want to drive out better value for taxpayers through competitive performance funding for our institutions of higher learning across those 5 metrics that I mentioned.
I thought I remember that the university said that they needed $300 and some million just to keep tuition at its current level. So how do you give them $350 million and then expect them to cut? How does that work out?
Well, we'll have to hear what the universities have to say. We think a 10% increase in funding is a remarkable change from what's been happening in past legislative sessions. So this is a big step in the right direction. We've heard from, and we've worked on various aspects of this with our institutions of higher learning. Certainly, there's some desire by some of our institutions to put new dollars into particularly faculty salary increases. I think those dollars need to first look at benefiting students. I was disappointed when Western both increased its tuition over 10% and gave faculty salary increases. I thought that money should have gone into students. So this is making sure that students have a strong voice in higher education.
So you'll basically be telling the universities how to spend this money? You're going to say you can't spend it on salary increases.
They can still give salary increases. What we're saying is the universities are getting 10% more money than you have today. College tuition is going down, and you have more money available to you in the form of $50 million in this competitive performance fund that you can compete for.
Does this apply to 4 years and 2 years?
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's different, the competition fund is different for the two of them.
A couple questions. On the second page of the press release, you say this plan's effect on the total state budget barely tops $42 million. Is that the whole thing or just the STEM part of it? And then secondly, do you have a goal about sort of, the state will be at 50% of higher ed funding as opposed to, what is it, 40 or 30 now? Do you have sort of a benchmark there?
I missed last part, yeah.
So I think the state contributes 30% of higher ed funding, the rest is picked up by tuition and other costs. So you're saying a 10% increase, but you have a target, you're trying to get to 50%.
So I would like us, I think an appropriate level is a 50-50 split for students and tuition. Now, this does not do that. That is because of the severity of the cuts that have been made in higher ed and what's happened to students in the last decade, which has been conscious choices of the legislature at a time that overall growth in government has increased, but this is a step in the right direction back towards that.
And then this $42 million, is that, what does that come from?
Yeah, so that, what that essentially gets at is to make universities whole on the 3% reduction is about that level of funding, $42 million. How much, if you wanted to put, give them a 3% cut and give them that amount of money back, that's about that level of funding.
So you're giving them 10% more.
Yes.
Plus make up the 3%.
In total, they'll receive a 10% increase.
Right.
Okay.
So you subtract the 3%.
Yeah.
And the 7% expansion for state grants, what does that work out to in dollars?
Well, actually,
It's about 26 million.
Yeah, about 26 million, but it also will pick up about 4,600 new students.
Wait, when you guys talk in the press release, it says this total state budget impact is 42 million. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so the 42 million, and we'll have to clarify that, is what is the cost institute, I mean, how much money do you have to make up for a 3% decrease in, how many dollars is that for the institutions? It's about that level of funding. That may not be worded precisely in the press release, so we'll take a look at that, but it's about that level. I mean, the top point here is a 10% increase in funding.
I think one thing to focus in on also is that we're changing the way the state has been operating in terms of funding of higher ed. And so the universities have become more efficient out of need as they've seen their state dollars being reduced. So some good things have happened in terms of how they operate structurally. But now if the state is going to increase its commitment back into higher education with a 10% increase in general fund spending, I believe personally, that a portion of that should go to the students to try and curtail the tuition increases that they have seen over the past 8 years. And that's really what we're trying to get out here. Understanding that we now do a 4-year budget, which is very good. But going forward, we're not saying we'll go down 3% every year, but let's take a breather on the tuition increases right now because they've been hit so hard with them, give them some assurances for the next 2 years and use that new investment that we're going to be taking out of the general fund, both to increase our access to STEM, but also to say to students, we understand what's been happening to you over the past 8 years with tuition increases. Let's take a break from that and reduce it, and then keep moving forward in Washington State with our commitment to higher ed. So.
Okay, I guess I'm still totally confused on the money question there. So does this mean that in order to enact this plan, the legislature would have to provide an additional $300 million to higher education or an additional $42 million?
An additional $300 million to higher ed.
Okay, and that $300 million, that includes the $50 million for the performance limit?
Yes.
Okay, so it's $300 million total. Okay. Well, I am just wondering here, how do you think this is going to sit with the schools? I mean, a couple of years ago, we just had this great big deal where the colleges and universities were granted tuition setting authority, complete autonomy, and then some of them raised tuition straight from the roof. And it sounds like you're taking that ability away from them. How do you think they're going to like it?
Well, I think they'll be very pleased that they're getting 10% more money than they received before, and they'll be very pleased that the legislature is prioritizing higher education and not continuing the cuts and the deprioritization of higher education that have gone on. Certainly, I think they'll have some concerns about tuition setting authority. You know, when they have tuition setting authority, they have independence from legislative decision making. But what's happened with the tuition setting authority the last couple of years, we've seen double-digit tuition increases, and students have continued to lose. You know, I think this is a new day, and it's about putting more money into higher ed. And that's why we have to come up bold in this so it doesn't get lost in the conversation. And once again, legislators pay lip service to higher education funding, but when it comes to actually writing a budget, that it gets lost in all the other things that Olympia decides to spend money on first. So that's why we're coming out bold, coming out now, and coming out in this plan that is directed both at helping higher ed in total with 10% more funding, but particularly making sure that benefit goes to students.
I think it's also important to understand, in the future, college education will not necessarily be optional. We are going to be facing some 30,000 jobs that are opening up that we will not have people skilled and trained and educated to get those jobs. We have to put priority on higher education. We have to marry our K-12 and our higher ed so that we have students progressing from K-12 on to higher education, and there is a job waiting at the end of that process. This is something that we have been studying in higher ed. We've been looking at it very closely. This is a great step forward for a win for our students. It's a win for our universities because we're going to have more students prepared to be there. And it's also a win for our economy, and that we will have people employed in those jobs that are going now unfilled.
I just wanted to circle back on one thing, and just to be clear, so it's not really a 10% increase in funding because you're essentially taking $42 million and backfilling a cut in tuition.
We currently spend about $2.7 billion in higher education. Our budget will come out with about above a $3 billion figure for higher education. That's a 10% increase.
The institutions are getting, I mean, you're just backfilling part of that for a cut in tuition. And then
certainly, but students are going to benefit from a decrease in tuition. Sure. That's right.
So, and then on the $300 million, so out of that, there's basically $200 million that's basically free for institutions to do what they want to with. $50 million is targeted, and then the remainder goes into.
Yeah, and let me talk about the performance fund for just a second. You know, the universities will be competing against themselves on a rolling 3-year average, or being best in class on a performance measure for the 5 metrics that we've laid out. And so that was one of the strong concerns of the universities, was that they represent different student populations and that they'd be able to improve in outcomes, and those that are already at the top of class are doing very, very well in certain metrics, that they should be rewarded for that. And then it's my hope that as we continue to do the right thing by higher education in future budgets, that performance fund, as the economy rebounds and we have more money to put in, can continue to grow. And so they'll have this ability to drive better value for taxpayers. It'll be more visible. That's why in 1795 of 2 years ago, those metrics, that scorecard metric, was set up to increase visibility and accountability for the taxpayers to say, Washington, what's going on in higher ed. So we think this is a real win.
Is the GAT sort of liability to surplus just a function of the limiting tuition?
Yeah, if
you're not adding any more money to it.
Right.
If you make a commitment to higher ed and prioritize it by holding tuition down, you can get a sound with a sound surplus.
Right.
Early in the caucus, early in the session, there was the sense that you got to get rid of GET, close it down. Is this a recognition, or is this a new day for the caucus? You're not trying to get rid of GET?
Well, some of us said that we will not get rid of GET because it was just a matter of trying to find a way to make it actuarially sound. And after studying those reports, it was very evident to me, having worked in those areas a long time, that it was a viable program. All we needed to do was do some adjustments. That was before we started talking about tuition decreases. And with this, we not only take away the liability, the unfunded liability that exists right now, we actually turn it to about 122% funded state, which is really a very good place for an investment to be.
Those folks that we're talking about the need to, the financial problems of GET, that was a symptom of a sickness, and the sickness is defunding higher education, right, and not making a commitment to prioritization of higher education, prioritizing students. GET is a good program. We want quality, higher, affordable higher education in this state. We need to fund it. If you fund it, there's no problem with GET.
So you mentioned the word bipartisan a little while ago, and I don't see any Democrats up there, but your mention of GET reminds me that the person who was speaking loudest about getting rid of GET was the Majority Caucus leader. He's a Democrat. So what Democrats do you have signed on to this, and have you got any support specifically from Rodney Tong for this?
Sure, we do have Rodney Tong's support for this proposal. You'll see a bill drop today that has a number of senators on board. What was important about discussions is, again, a lot of legislators talk about care for higher education. But when you actually get down to prioritizing a budget and where you put the numbers, sometimes what's happened in the past, evidence is suggestion that those folks that talk about making higher education priority have defunded when it actually comes to putting higher ed spending dollars above other areas of the budget. And so we've come out today with this bold statement about this is the direction we would like things to go. And as discussions carry forward about the total amount of money that the state spends, and when tough decisions have to be made, we want to make sure that it does not come out of students. Again, we think with a 7% increase in revenue, there's enough funding there to provide a 3% cut to 7% increase to the general fund, enough money there to put some of that into student tuition.
Just really quick. I just want to say really quick, we talk a lot about the students in tuition, but really we're talking about families in tuition. And I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. As we start thinking about higher ed and how we can keep it affordable for people in our income brackets, we have to get a handle on it. And one of the things with tuition setting authority, the reason for that in past years was the reduction of state commitment to higher ed. And so the trade-off was, as we reduce general state funds going into higher education, we would allow the universities the ability to raise tuition at a higher level to make up for it. Now, if we turn that around and make the commitment to a 10% increase, the tuition setting authority is not as important at the individual universities. They still might not like that particular pathway, but I represent the families who are sending their kids to those universities just as much as I represent those universities, and we'll work with them to get to a solution. But if we get the commitment from the state again, a portion of that commitment should benefit those working families who are trying to send their kids to university right now.
I think I've heard the caucus say overall that you're going to balance the $1.3 billion budget, you're going to put $1 billion-ish, I think is what I've heard, dollars into nuclear aid, $300 million into higher education, and no new taxes. So can you find that $2.6, $2.7 million in cuts to human services, or am I missing something about some other source of revenue?
I think it's very possible to write a budget that was within the state's means that increases higher education funding 10% and still fills the other core obligations of the state.
Especially when we have 7% increase in revenue coming to the state. It's not as though it's a stagnant number. It increases all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, as long as I've been, it sounds like you were about to say something, Doug.
Oh, no.
Okay. Well, as long as I've been around here, it seems as though the colleges and universities have always been making the argument that money equals quality. Okay, I've also sort of gotten the idea around here lately that there's sort of a sense in the legislature that there's a bit of bloat at the colleges and universities. So I'm wondering, this proposal obviously is going to force colleges and universities to ratchet down the amount of money that they spend on their programs, and I'm just wondering, do you guys think there are efficiencies that they can make without impacting quality?
Well, I would hope we can run a university with 10% increase in funding.
And a performance model that allows them to even have more money.
Okay.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Does the whole caucus support this?
We have not every caucus member has signed on to the bill, but this is a caucus position.
Is there a majority that has signed on to this?
Well, the bill is still,
Yeah, the bill's still circulating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so-
we have 11 signatures now, roughly.
It's a caucus position, so
It
you
is,
vote on
yeah.
in this state, the caucus supports this.
Yes,
Right.
yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
thanks.
Thanks so much. I hope you agree with our idea that it's time to make higher education a priority and not just talk about providing funding, but actually stepping to the mark in prioritizing funding when we finally get to the budget. If you'd like to learn more, you can always be in contact with my office, and I hope you follow this bill closely in the legislature because college tuition is too high and it's time to bring those rates down.